My name is Marcus, a practicing advocate of the High Court of South Africa. The following pro bono legal information is an effort to protect everyone who intends entering into a contract. If you intend concluding a seriously binding legal transaction with someone, please first find out whether they are married in community of property or not. In South African law, customary marriage is by default in community of property. If they are so married, go further and inquire whether they have obtained the necessary consent to conclude the transaction from their spouse. There are certain commercial transactions which a person married in community of property cannot conclude without the consent of their spouse. In particular, transactions which involve real rights in property such as sale, donation, mortgage, suretyship, and servitude need to be concluded with either written or any consent of the other spouse. If such a transaction was concluded without the necessary consent, it is null and void, and therefore legally unenforceable. The other spouse whose consent was necessary yet circumvented may reverse the transaction or take it into account when they share the property with the defaulting spouse upon divorce of the parties, should that happen. However, if you did not know or couldn't reasonably have known that the person with whom you concluded a commercial transaction did not obtain their spouse's consent when they actually should have done so, then the transaction will nevertheless be valid. Therefore, if you concluded a transaction with someone married in community of property or customary marriage without the consent of their spouse, then you need to show that your lack of knowledge about the lack of consent was not due to your negligence. Otherwise, you would not be able to enforce the contract. However, in case of donations of minor things, the spouse does not need the consent of the other. That is where the value of the item or the right donated is far less than the total value of the whole property of the spouses. Every time you conclude a transaction that involves valuable items or immovable property such as a house, shares, etc., do not forget to first find out if the person you intend concluding the transaction with is married in community of property or in terms of customary rights. Otherwise, you might conclude an invalid contract that you wouldn't be able to enforce in court should the person with whom you concluded it decides not to honor it.